Colorado has another hater, but can Oregon stop the Buffaloes hype train? Let's talk about it.
Welcome to FanBuzz Weekly. I am Tyler Brook, joined alongside Patrick. Everyone wants to talk about Colorado and Deion Sanders right now. It feels like every week there's a new thing to make things personal with the Colorado Buffaloes. This week with them taking on the Oregon Ducks, big controversy is Oregon head coach Dan Lanning prior to the season kind of bashing Deion Sanders in Colorado, saying he's not worried because they haven't won anything, really taking some shots. And now the whole theory is that they've made things personal. How are you feeling about all these like jabs at Colorado? Do you think this is just for entertainment or you think this is real beef?
In my notes for this game, all I have is it's personal. Just it's personal. That's all you need to have. I actually don't think Dan Lanning said anything too crazy. I think he's right. He was saying Colorado hasn't really done anything since their national championship in the 90s. They haven't really won anything. They still haven't really won anything. I mean, Colorado State probably should have beat them. And if we're looking at the actual game, I think Oregon is the much, much, much better team on paper. They're scoring 58 points per game right now. Colorado's defense has not looked great, especially in that last, overtime game. Plus, no Travis Hunter. No Travis Hunter is a big deal because he almost takes away one side of the field on defense. Plus, he plays offense. I don't think it was a big deal from Dan Lanning. I think Deion loves to make everything a big deal to get his guys fired up, which I think is smart, actually. But when it comes down to the game, I think this is all Oregon. Of course, when we started doing this, I said Deion was probably going to win 3 or 4 games, and he's already got that. So maybe I owe him an apology at this point.
Yeah, I mean, the schedule does not get easier from here. This is far and away their toughest matchup. And after that Colorado State game, you have to imagine they're probably not going to be favored in this one. But, just aside from the game itself, I feel like this is just becoming a bit of a circus. It's WWE promos every week, it feels like. And as we've noticed after last week, Deion Sanders has no problem turning everything into a spectacle. The amount of media appearances he made leading up to that rivalry game against Colorado State was just outrageous. You have The Rock showing up for College Game Day. You have Lil Wayne introing the team. You have Offset. You have Master P. You just have all these celebrities on the field. Kawhi Leonard's at the game. It's probably the wildest, movement I've ever seen in college football. And it's usually, especially in this sport, in the old era, it took years for you. Give me 5 years, we'll build this program into something. This took 4 months? And all of a sudden it's the craziest team in college football. If they win, we're never going to hear the end of it. I'm very excited to watch it, though. Don't get me wrong. Shedeur Sanders, I have to say it. I think that kid's a first-round quarterback. There's a lot of good quarterbacks in this draft class. That kid's poise, his arm talent, his mobility, his ability to make plays off script, all of that screams legitimate quarterback prospect to me. I'm curious to see if he goes pro, but I think that's enough Colorado talk for one day. I'm sure we'll be talking about him again next week, regardless of the final score. Let's get to a topic that Patrick obviously wants to talk about, his Florida Gators, which got a little dicey week 1 after that Utah loss. But suddenly, at home against the Tennessee Volunteers team that was supposed to be pretty good with Joe Milton, kind of kicked them out the club. Really dominated. They're back in the AP top 25. How are you feeling about the Gators so far, Patrick? And are you bought in on Graham Mertz?
Man, I'm all the way in right now for obvious reasons. But here's the thing. Tennessee was supposed to have a pretty strong defense coming into that game.
Mm-hmm.
Graham Mertz was surgical. I think in the
That's
first
a good way to put it.
Yeah, and I think in the first half, at one point, he was 13 of 15 for 150 yards. The dude was not making any mistakes. Sure, he's not throwing it downfield, 20, 25 plus yards. He didn't need to. Plus the run game with Etienne was insane. I think the real story of the game was Florida's offensive line. And another storyline too was that Joe Milton is overhyped. He people thought he was going to come in that system and just throw the lights out the stadium, but it wasn't it. It wasn't it. I think people are saying that his accuracy is not anywhere near what they were expecting. But yeah, I'm all in on Mertz. I think after that Tennessee game, hot take, I think he's a top 3 SEC quarterback. I think there's Jaden Daniels. Okay. And then you could probably throw in someone else for a team that hasn't really played much. But right now, I think he's top 5, making a case for top 3. He's number 1 in completion percentage in the SEC, which goes a long way, as you can tell. Now, do I think Florida is going to compete in the East. I don't know. They still have to play Georgia, LSU, Kentucky on the road. South Carolina looked pretty decent against Georgia. They have FSU at the end of November. So, like, the schedule is going to make it incredibly tough. But I think we're high right now. We're riding that high.
I mean, the thing that stood out to me the most was Trevor Etienne, obviously the little brother of Travis Etienne, former Clemson and now Jaguars running back. But I mean, 23 carries, 172 yards and a touchdown. And that man runs angry. He's got the burst and he is not afraid of contact. I'm in love with that kid as a running back. He's probably one of my favorite ones in college football to watch. But like you said, schedule is going to be tough. What does the record have to be for Napier to keep his job? Or do you think he's not as on the hot seat as much as fans are thinking?
I've always thought you have to beat your rivals. Like,
Yeah.
if you're not beating your rivals, you're not staying. And I know a lot of people think he's gone if he can't win a certain number of games. But, like, beating Tennessee was big. I think if he can beat maybe, 2 out of 3 of, like, Georgia, LSU, FSU, I think he's definitely good. Even one, I think he might be okay because, like, it's obviously a tough schedule. He has a great recruiting class coming in. I'm not sure anyone was expecting, national championship with Graham Mertz of all guys. But this would buy him time if he gets to, even 8 wins. I think he's fine. Anything under 500, I think he could be gone, but let's not talk about that.
Oh, geez. Well, we'll see. We'll see what happens with the Gators. It's going to be an interesting ride for sure. But I think that's enough Gators talk. You've got your stuff. It's time for me to talk about my team, Georgia Bulldogs, and I cannot wait for our teams to play each other down the road. But obviously, probably one of the bigger stories of the past weekend. They were on upset alert at half against South Carolina, down 14-3, pull out that 24-14 win. And now all the talk is, obviously still retaining that number 1 spot. But are they the best team in college football? And that's the question going on. Patrick, I'm going to take over this first and then let you dive into it. I don't need to hear any Gator slander about my dogs. But I think this team, you saw it in the second half. That defense can still be suffocating, absolutely dominant. And the question really is just that offensive side of the ball. You've lost so much talent over the past couple of years. I'm thinking Pickens, Stetson Bennett, Darnell Washington. And right now you're just kind of relying on a new guy in Carson Beck who's not doing a lot. Run game, that's kind of a huge question mark. But Brock Bowers is still there. And I think the key piece, hopefully coming back soon for them, Ladd McConkey, the wide receiver that's missed the first 3 games of the season. That kid can play. That kid is a very, very legitimate wide receiver. And missing him has just, they've had a lack of a dimension in the passing game. And let's not forget, they have a plethora of running backs. Kendall Milton's kind of been banged up. I think him coming back will be a huge boost. I just think they're missing pieces on offense. And again, as we saw in that second half, when they play like that, that is still the best team in college football. Now, okay, Patrick, you can go ahead. You need to slander them a little bit, you can. And if you have another team in mind as the best one, oh, geez. Oh, no. If you have another team in mind for best team in college football, I'm willing to listen.
First, I was going to ask, how much do you miss Stetson Bennett? Like, that was my first thing that I thought was damn, maybe we kind of, like, took Stetson Bennett for granted. Like, I mean, just watching that game in the first half, that's all I was thinking was, man, Stetson would be tearing this team apart. But how much do you miss him?
I miss him a bit. I think what was always impressive by me is, like, he never got rattled. I mean, I think back to that national championship game when he played like crap against Alabama that first time around, and then just came alive in the second half and just kind of took over. That and his mobility and ability to escape the pocket and take off with his legs is definitely a missing dimension. I'm not sold on Carson Beck yet, but there's so much time left for me to make a decision on that.
I mean, they're probably in a better spot than Alabama at the quarterback position.
Fair. Very fair.
As far as the best team in the country right now, I don't think it's Georgia. No bias there. I think it's either Michigan or USC. Michigan has showed that they have probably the best defense so far. They've given up 3, 7, and 6 points in their first 3 games, which is kind of unheard of. And then there's USC, who's putting up 50 to 60 a game with Caleb Williams, obviously. So, like, I think those two are playing like the best teams in the country. Now, like, have they played teams of note? Not really, the way that, like, Georgia played South Carolina or whatever. So, like, it's still early, but if we're going off numbers and if we're going off, what sort of the tape is saying, I think it's those 2 teams. And I think that'd be actually a really fun national championship game.
I know we got to move on to another segment, but there's one more team I want to throw out there. The Washington Huskies. That offensive passing game is unreal. Michael Penix Jr., former Indiana guy, I should say, Indiana Hoosiers legend before he transferred, left in good graces, making a real case for a Heisman. You've got so many wide receivers on that team. Jalen Polk, Roma Dunze, McMillan, can't remember his first name at the moment, but just guys that are just getting open, have speed, have contested catch ability, and a quarterback that loves to sling it downfield. I think his yards per attempt right now is something like 11 yards. So basically every time he drops back to pass, it's a first down. Their passing attack is one of the most dominant I've ever seen. And then on the defense, you still have a first-round caliber pass rusher in Braylon Trice. So I think that is a team that is going to give USC some fits. It's going to give the Pac-12 some fits. I think they are a college football playoff contender. I'm just hoping we can see more of them on the national stage. But I think that's an... Go ahead.
So one thing, how about the irony of like the Pac-12 being the most fun it's like ever been before they're disbanding, right? Like Washington, USC, Colorado, Oregon, like so many teams that are just like so fun to watch, and they're just going to fall apart. Like that is like one of the travesties of college football right now.
It'll be one of those things, Patrick, when you and I are in our 50s and 60s, we'll tell like our grandkids, like, let me tell you about the Pac-12 conference and how awesome it was. All right, bringing on our recurring guest, Will Schwartz, Michigan grad. So again, just the IU guy in me, just that always makes me feel a little gross. But Will, how are you doing today, man?
Not bad, not bad. It was a fun college football weekend, although that BC game is still getting to me. I mean, anyone who follows me on Twitter knows I was not happy.
Yeah. I can appreciate that. We got a couple segments here to talk about with Will. Wanted to start with LSU, who kind of got roasted at the beginning of the year playing Florida State, falling in that second half, to a solid Florida State team that is a potential playoff contender. But now, after 2 straight wins, a giant 72-10 blowout over Grambling, 41-14 over Mississippi State, the talk is back. Is LSU a college football playoff contender, Will?
Man, it's really hard to say. I mean, Florida State is a quality loss, and as much as we love quality losses, it's a missed opportunity to pick up a quality win. That being said, this is a Florida State team that Boston College scored on at will, and I don't know, that was a special game. There were some weird circumstances, but it's a little concerning that LSU wasn't able to do the same, even though it was in a neutral field. That being said, I don't know how high we can be on Mississippi State in general. I think Will Rogers has looked completely different since the unfortunate loss of Mike Leach. He's been a completely different quarterback outside of that unique air raid system. I think it's going to be big to see how LSU does in the matchup they have coming up, not this week, but soon, with Ole Miss. See how their defense handles like a multifaceted offense with a really good line. They can go through the air. They have a good running attack. It's hard to say LSU is a true contender, though, seeing as what little margin for error there is, having already lost a game. But if you win the SEC or in the playoff, I've said that an SEC champ could go in with 3 losses. And of course, that Florida State loss, it's not great for resume, but it doesn't change LSU's SEC standing. So they're alive, but I think hanging on by a thread.
Yeah, I've admittedly been a bit of a doubter of LSU, especially Jaden Daniels, but I think that kid has taken a huge step forward this year, completing nearly 74% of his passes, has 8 touchdowns compared to 1 interception, and running the ball pretty well, had a pair of rushing touchdowns against Mississippi State. So I think there's something there. I think if that huge step forward can play a huge role in LSU's success this year, put him back in the Heisman contention, all of that. Just something about him I wasn't sold on last year, but the fact that he's turning it around as a more of a confident passer instead of just dropping his eyes and trying to take off, and you have so much speed on that offense, I think that spells some potential upset alert for LSU on some of these other contenders as the season rolls on. Moving on into the SEC, the big matchup this week, Alabama, Ole Miss. Definitely some questions about Alabama after the last couple of weeks. Really, really shaky performance against South Florida. Is Ole Miss going to take down Alabama, have a repeat of 2015?
I think they're going to make a real run at it in another edition of what I was researching this, and I don't know how it's considered a rivalry. Alabama's up like 56-10 all time, but I do think Ole Miss can make it. I think Ole Miss can make it very, very competitive this season. This is a game where if it was in Oxford, I'd be having a much more confident conversation about this upset. Although I say upset, but they're only separated by about 2 spots in the AP poll. But it's tough to win at Tuscaloosa, but Texas just did it, and they almost looked worse against Wyoming this week. They won, I think, 31-10, but it took them quite some time to pull away. Ole Miss came pretty close last year against an Alabama team with Bryce Young, the first overall draft pick. And their defense is pretty well equipped to beat the run with a good amount of physicality. So they're going to force Alabama into the air, which in the past has not been a problem. But this year, that is such a bad thing for Alabama. They've been struggling to find their quarterback. Jalen Milroe benched after Texas. Tyler Buchner, Notre Dame guy, and we'll talk about them more in a little bit. But it was rainy, but 5 of 14 passing against South Florida is not cool. And there's a pretty solid pass rush coming in from Ole Miss. JJ Pegues, I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right, on the D-line, and Kari Coleman and Ashanti Sistrunk at linebacker. You've got some guys who can make things really hard for a quarterback. We don't even know if it's going to be Milroe, Buchner, Ty Simpson, some kind of mix, but whoever it is, they're not going to be in a comfortable place to begin with, and that Ole Miss front seven can make them even more uncomfortable. So, I don't know. I'm loving, I think it's like a touchdown spread if you're a bettor, but outright's a tough call. I think Alabama, this is a find-away game for Alabama, but they are not going to make it pretty, and I would not be surprised to be wrong on the outcome.
I think Ole Miss has it. I think the biggest problem here is just Alabama's offensive line is not what it used to be. That used to be something they prided themselves on, and I just think it looks ugly. I don't even think it's like a potential question. I think it's a straight-up liability. If Milroe starts, I think that rushing ability is helpful, but it's also a problem when you're trying to pass, when you're just trying to abandon the pass so quickly. And we saw that in his last start, that he just wants to drop his eyes against Texas and just kind of run away instead of trying to, trust your pocket for a split second longer, hope someone gets open. That's going to be a huge issue. I think Lane Kiffin's going to have Ole Miss ready. I think there's plenty of motivation for him to get his team energized for this game. I think it's upset city. I think Ole Miss might be able to take this one down. I think down goes Bama, 2 losses early in the season. Not going to be a great start for them.
Love to see it. I mean, it would be kind of an end of Bama. This was their first time since 2003 starting 1-1 after the Texas loss.
Wow.
I don't even know the last time they were 2-2. And this was their first time in 128 AP polls falling outside of the top 10. It could be the ultimate Nick Saban bounce back spot after this, but if they do lose to Ole Miss, you have to be talking end of an era, seeing as they really haven't been around the national title conversation in the last couple of seasons after Georgia's kind of risen up and taken the crown from them.
Last game preview I wanted to talk about Ohio State, Notre Dame. Just such an interesting Midwest showdown. 2 top 10 teams, 2 that are on that cusp of playoff contention, but really need that prove it game. What are you looking for in this game? What's your expectation? What's your prediction?
The biggest thing I'm looking for is how the Ohio State pass rush is going to be able to get after Sam Hartman. He's a great passer, and he's had a really good start to the year. But one thing that hasn't changed since coming over from Wake is that he has had a lot of problems under pressure. Hasn't thrown a big-time pass under pressure this year. He's had 2 turnover-worthy plays, although neither has actually been picked off. But obviously regression comes when you keep making turnover-worthy plays. And Ohio State has, per PFF, the second-best pass rush in the country with a really strong edge duo. So they could make Hartman uncomfortable. They can put him in some positions where he's going to be making bad decisions. And we haven't seen it yet this year because Notre Dame's protecting him at about much better rate than Wake did. It's like a 20% pressure rate versus 33. So we haven't seen him be in those uncomfortable situations, but his rate-based stats are the same. Notre Dame look really sharp, though. They've won blowouts against Navy, North Carolina State with some weird weather and a delay in the scoreboard getting hit by lightning. And they ran by Central Michigan, who could be a pretty solid MAC team once they dig into that schedule. One thing I love to see from Hartman is he's getting it downfield. He's throwing it almost 12 yards per attempt, not completion. That's attempt, and that's a career best by far.
That's outrageous.
I mean, it's against some teams that really haven't challenged him, but he beat his ghosts in NC State. So I don't know, sky's the limit. I love the line of 3.5 for Notre Dame at home against an Ohio State team that has not shown me anything. They haven't shown that they could move on from CJ Stroud with Kyle McCord coming in. Even Devin Brown's gotten some reps and looked shaky. So, Tyler, I know you probably watched all 60 minutes of them against Indiana, and as much as you'd love to attribute it to the Hoosiers being surprisingly solid, I don't know if you could be happy from an Ohio State perspective if you're a Buckeye. So, I love Notre Dame in this one. I think they're gonna take down OSU. This is a game where I'm so personally invested that I can be objective because I dislike both teams so bitterly, and I might like Notre Dame just a little less, but I do think they are going to take away the win in this one, and Ohio State will have a very narrow path to the playoff if they drop this big resume piece.
I didn't appreciate the Hoosier stray right there. They got some good linebackers right now. I'll tell you what. This is probably the most entertaining Hoosiers team I've watched since the COVID year with some controversial Big Ten, stuff. They should have been in that Big Ten championship.
Yeah.
COVID rules, and then they decided to change them just so Ohio State can get in. But that's either here than there. I do like Notre Dame in this one. Kyle McCord, this is like kind of a prove it game for him. I don't think he's looked too great considering the weapons he has. That Western Kentucky game, they finally figured it out later in that game and just kind of poured it on. But what I'm really excited about, Audric Estime for this Notre Dame team only has 63 carries this season, averaging 8.3 yards a carry with 5 touchdowns. Just some outrageous production on the ground. And I think a big reason for that is Joe Alt, the offensive tackle. That kid's going to be a top 5, top 10 pick in the draft. Just an absolute, we talk about Notre Dame tackles, it feels like every year. This kid is freaking special. Of the class of, the tackles that Notre Dame's produced, this kid's near the top. I think that run game, Hartman's really pouring it on, hasn't thrown an interception through 4 games. So obviously he's going to throw one now that I've brought it up. But I just think there's too much talent on that offense. I'm very excited to see this matchup. This will probably be far and away the most entertaining one. I'm thinking it's close. I just think McCord, too inexperienced. I think it's going to be too many mistakes for Ohio State to shoot themselves in the foot. Notre Dame comes away with the win.
I'm glad you brought up Alt. I think that the matchup between him and either JT or Jack Sawyer, whoever lines up across from him more often, man, that could be one of the best tackle edge duos we see all year in college football. I mean, that's an NFL caliber duo. Those guys are both going to be top picks. So that's going to be really cool to watch from someone who loves good play around the line of scrimmage.
Same here, man. Same here. But that's all we got for you, Will. Thanks so much for joining us on FanBuzz Weekly. I'm sure we'll see you again very soon. Crazy lineup of games. So many to choose from. It's going to be one of those where if you have an extra TV, you might need to slide it into your living room, get the quad box going, something like that. But of all these games, Patrick, which one are you most excited to watch?
I mean, look, I'm still going to the circus. Like, I love the circus that is Colorado. They're putting up crazy viewership ratings for obvious reasons. It almost feels like UFC-esque, where there's so much trash talk before the actual matchup that, like, you can't help but tune in. I mean, I stayed up till, I don't even know how long to watch the Colorado State game. And then I think it was the most watched regular season late game that, like, ESPN's ever had or something. So, like, I've got that one circled for obvious reasons. I think Ohio State Notre Dame is also a good one. Obviously, a top 10 matchup. I think that's going to be one of those, like, which one is a fraud game? Because, both teams, like, this is their first true test. So that'll be interesting. Also, Florida State Clemson. I'm kind of hoping for Clemson. Dabo to redeem himself. Like, this is it. This is his time if he wants to prove that, like, he's not kind of falling by the wayside. He doesn't like the transfer portal. And FSU didn't look great against Boston College. I mean, Boston College lost by 2, and they had a chance to win at the end of the game, if not for a penalty. And then, there's so many matchups that, like, I can't even get to them all, but I'd have those as my top 3. What about you?
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be so many I'm going to be trying to tune into, but that Ohio State Notre Dame game especially, definitely a huge college football playoff statement win for whoever wins that. But I'm not totally sold on Ohio State yet. I know they turned it on against Western Kentucky and they have all those weapons. This is that prove it game for Kyle McCord, who's shown some rockiness at times as a first year starter, and I think that's kind of to be expected. And at the same time with Notre Dame, Sam Hartman fascinates me. He came from such a different offense with that super slow mesh RPO. He's holding on to that handoff before he lets it go. And now he's playing in more of a pro style with Notre Dame. And he's honestly killing it. I don't think he's thrown an interception yet through 3 games. Just looking really poised. They have tons of talent on both sides of the ball. And I believe it is in South Bend. So really looking forward to that game. I just think it's going to be a statement for whoever wins. And again, I think it's going to be Notre Dame. I'm not totally sold on the Buckeyes this year. Might be slanderous being in the Midwest, but, I'm also kind of a hater being an IU grad. So there we go. That's going to do it for us at FanBuzz Weekly. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Tyler. That's Patrick. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Leave any comments of things you want to see in the future. But we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.